Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ben, and I am the Chief Planning Officer of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey. It's really wonderful to welcome you to this community study information session about our 2020 Greater Metro West Jewish Community Studies, particularly focused on some of the perspective of the data around what we learned about our Jewish community in Union County. I'm new to the Greater Metro West community. I joined the Greater Metro West Federation back in August. It's been a great first few months for me in the community, meeting wonderful colleagues and also terrific community members throughout the community. I think some of you I've gotten the chance to meet already. I'm glad to meet you here in this group setting, and I hope that we get to meet in a more personal way in the weeks and months ahead. It's been a really amazing time to join the Greater Metro West Jewish Federation right as we are sharing the outcome and the data from our 2020 community study. The purpose of the 2020 community study is to provide the Greater Metro West Jewish community with reliable information to help all of us, those of us who work at the Jewish Federation and also throughout the Jewish community, to better fulfill our mission, to care for people in need and to build a vibrant Jewish community. Now, we haven't collected this sort of data about the Jewish community in Greater Metro West in over 20 years. So it's really terrific that the leadership of the Federation invested in a state-of-the-art research study to learn about ourselves. We engaged the Maurice and Marilyn Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University, which is a renowned multidisciplinary research institute dedicated to the study of American Jewry and religious and cultural identity. The reports from our community study were released last month, back in November, and are available to everyone to read on the Federation website. Tonight, we're really pleased to have with us Janet Aronson, who's the lead researcher of our community study. And in a moment, she's going to share with us some details about how she and her team did the study, what the methodology was, and then also a selection of key findings, some of them about all of the Greater Metro West Jewish community, and tonight in particular, focusing on some of the key data points around the Jewish community in Union County. After Janet has presented, there'll be a time for questions. And so we're going to collect questions through the chat. If, as Janet is presenting, you want to put questions in the chat along the way, that's great. I'll keep track of them so we can moderate those questions. Also later during the Q&A, there'll be more opportunity to put those questions in as well. So in a more formal way, I'd like to introduce Janet Krasner Aronson, the Associate Director of the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University. Janet earned her PhD in social policy at the Heller School for Social Policy at Brandeis, and she's directed and contributed to local Jewish community studies in over a dozen communities. Very recently, one that she and the Cohen Center published about the Jewish community of Chicago, and the most recent one being us in Greater Metro West. Janet is especially happy to be learning about her home community in Metro West New Jersey. She grew up in Union County. She's a proud graduate of what used to be called, when she went there, the Solomon Schechter Day School of Essex in Union, and now we know and love as the Golda Ach Academy. And we're really, really pleased to welcome Janet back home to share the learning of the 2020 community study with all of us. Janet, please.
Hi, thanks everybody. So glad to be here. As Ben mentioned, I grew up in Union and in the 60s and 70s, and I know that things have changed quite a bit since then. I've kind of kept in touch, and I look forward to hearing from you, your take on this information that we're sharing tonight. So I am going to start with an overview of the study and then go into some specifics of the different geographic regions and what are some of the different findings and characteristics of the regions that make up Greater Metro West. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is just framing, and if you have been on any of the presentations, this will be a repeat for you. But I want to frame how we did the study and how to understand it and read the results. It is a survey. We had, I'll be talking about in a moment, we had over 3,000 respondents. As with all surveys like election polls, you interview a sample of people and you extrapolate those results to estimate what you would have found if you had asked every single person in the population. So what that means is the numbers we're going to look at are estimates. It should be understood as having sort of a margin of error, if you're familiar with that from election polls, a margin of error plus or minus. And that's why we don't focus on the numbers per se. They might be a little higher or lower. What we're really interested in is in patterns and in differences. And that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight, is the differences between the differences in the regions. As I mentioned, we surveyed about 3,000, over 33, almost 3,300 Jewish households in Greater Metro West. It's a very large sample, and that allowed us to provide a lot of information at subgroup levels, including the 4 regions that we've defined. One thing to keep in mind is that we conducted the survey, finished just about a year ago, between October and December. As I'm sure you all recall, it was a tumultuous time, as it continues to be, but I think even worse than, in the middle of not only the COVID health issues, economic issues, and political issues. So we did modify questions, and we tried to account for the fact that the situation was not the way it had been before. Nonetheless, it's a great opportunity to capture information about the community at that particular point in time, and use it as a building block for a new baseline for moving forward. So I'm going to go through in general some of the key findings from the study. I'll start with, of course, the size of the total population, the total Greater Metro West population. And you can see there are a lot of numbers on the screen. That's because there are a lot of components of the population, ways to think about them. There are over 122,000 Jewish people in Greater Metro West, and they live in almost 57,000 households. A household is one where at least one adult is Jewish. Of course, not everybody in those households is Jewish, so the total is 155,000 people living in Jewish households. So if you want to think about the most expansive definition of the Greater Metro West Jewish community, I would think about that 155,000 number. They're divided: Jewish adults, non-Jewish adults, Jewish children, non-Jewish children. Briefly, a Jewish adult is somebody who considers themselves Jewish. It could be that Judaism is their religion. It could be that they consider themselves Jewish culturally or ethnically. They may also, not in the majority of cases, but in some cases, they consider themselves to be Jewish and another religion. In addition to considering themselves Jewish, they need to have told us that they have at least one Jewish parent, that they were raised Jewish, or they converted to Judaism. For children, it's a little bit simpler. We ask if their parents consider them to be Jewish. If they do, they are Jewish. Again, in some of those cases, parents consider them to be Jewish and another religion. Thinking about just some of the demographics of the community, on the top row is the Greater Metro West Jewish community, and the middle row is US Jews by age. So you can see that the Greater Metro West Jews skew a little bit older than Jews on average. There are a lot more people in this age 45 to 64, that's this middle blue. And there are not surprisingly, not as many young people under age, this is age 44, or certainly under age 35. This is, and not a lot in the 18 to 24 group. The bottom row is all US adults, just for reference. Another important way of thinking about the community is just who lives in the households. What do the households look like? 80% of Jewish adults are married or have a partner that they live with. 33% of those adults are intermarried, married to a non-Jewish person. That's quite a bit lower than the average rate, which is 42% of all US Jews are intermarried. 30% of households include a minor child. Minor children are always under age 18, 0 to 17. This just shows of Jewish children, who are their parents. And we can see that just about an equal share have intermarried parents and in-married parents. And then in addition, a small number, 8%, have single parents. This is just another view of the types of households. It's a little complicated, but just to give you a picture of who's in the community. And we divide it between households with children. 23% of households, their youngest child is a school age. 7%, their youngest child is preschool age. In 6% of households, it's a single adult living alone, a younger single adult under 65. 13% of households is someone 65 or older living alone. 12% of households is couples without children, and 17% is older couples without children. Multi-generational adults, those are households where multiple generations of adults live together. So some of them are young adults living with their parents. Some of them are adults living with elderly parents, and that's kind of the range. Another important measure just to understand the community, 29% of households include somebody who's a member of a synagogue. Because there are multiple Jewish adults in those households, 31% of Jewish adults are synagogue members. This is a little bit less than the national average, that is 35%. About half of Jewish adults attended some kind of religious service in the past 6 months. Whenever we asked about behaviors like attending religious services because of COVID, we always asked about in-person or online. And that's an interesting thing to explore, to see who did which. And that's going to raise some questions going forward about whether people are going to continue to engage in online Jewish life. Another important way to understand the community is on Jewish denominations, very familiar. The first column is the denomination of Greater Metro West Jewish adults, and the second column is all US Jewish adults based on the Pew 2020 study, which came out around the same time. You can see, although the numbers are a little bit different between Metro West and all US Jews, the patterns are pretty similar. I think, as I mentioned earlier, if the numbers are a few points different, it's not necessarily a real difference in the population. But what's really interesting here, and this is a trend among the US Jewish community in general, is the large number of people who do not identify with a specific denomination. In this case, it's 38% of Jewish adults have no denomination. Half of them said that they were secular or culturally Jewish, and the rest said that they are just Jewish. And we're going to talk in a moment about how to understand the Jewish engagement of people who say they have no Jewish denomination. We've created a model to understand, it's a new typology to understand Jewish engagement. This is, there's a lot of detail about this in the Jewish engagement report, so I'll just go into it at a high level. We've developed a model where we look at about almost 20 measures, 20 Jewish behaviors. And unlike Jewish denomination, which focuses on Jewish religious behaviors like observing Shabbat or keeping kosher, this also includes communal behaviors, individual behaviors, things you do at home and with your family, with your friends, cultural behaviors, reading Jewish books, things like that. And what we try to do is identify the patterns of Jewish behavior, who is doing cultural things but not religious things, and vice versa. And based on this, we identified this model of 5 patterns of Jewish engagement. And basically, I won't go through all of them, but basically we say that 16% of Jewish adults are minimally involved. That means that the truth is they do very few of these Jewish behaviors. They're really not actively engaged in Jewish life. About the same number, 14%, are in the immersed group. That's the group that's fully engaged in all aspects of Jewish life. I'm going to talk and explain in a minute that this is not the same as being Orthodox. It's just participating in all kinds of aspects of Jewish life. Then the groups in between, they exhibit different patterns of Jewish life. The familial group, the most important Jewish activities for them are home-based holidays, and that's including, in this case, Hanukkah and having a Passover Seder. Those are their primary means of Jewish engagement. The personal group, also about a quarter of the population, they are most interested in the activities that they could do at home with friends and family, and they're not really interested in being involved in organizations. They might go to programs, but they don't belong, they don't join. So this personal group are doing, most of what they're doing are these activities like reading Jewish books, following news about Israel, having conversations about Jewish topics with their friends and family. Just to show you the difference between the engagement groups and denomination, this table shows you how the two compare. So you can see on the top row, this is you read across, among Orthodox Jews, 84% are in that immersed group, that highest engagement group. But there are some Orthodox Jews, a handful in the other groups, and 15% of them are in that personal group, that most of their Judaism is things that they're doing at home, and they're really not involved with organizations. But what's most interesting is this no denomination group, which I mentioned was 38% of the population. And so what you can see here is, you might think, well, they're not doing anything Jewish. In fact, only a quarter of them are in the minimal group. Only a quarter of them are really not engaged with Jewish life. And the rest of them are engaged in those other ways of participating in Jewish life, the home-based life, the personal life. They're just not really involved with Jewish organizations. So that's a framing of the whole study. And what I want to turn now into the focus of this session is about the geography of Greater Metro West. So I'm going to start with this map. There are towns marked on there, but what you'll see based on the colors is that we've divided Greater Metro West into 4 regions. Down here we have Union County. Here we have Essex County. Here we have most of Morris County. There's a line here. And then the remainder, the purple that we're calling Western Greater Metro West, is the rest of Morris, the little northern part of Somerset, and all of Sussex County. The reason we divided it this way, just so you'll know, is that we need to have enough households in every region to be able to tell you something about them. And the truth is that this Western Greater Metro West, this Sussex County, is pretty sparse in terms of Jews. So we included in there the parts of the contiguous parts of Morris County to make it a big enough region so that we could kind of say something about the Jews in that area. On this map, you can see the red dots. Each dot represents about 25 households. They're not exactly where those households are located. They're kind of randomly put in the zip codes. So you can really see from this map how there are areas that the Jewish population is very dense. Union County is kind of in the middle. Eastern Morris is less so, and then this Western Greater Metro West is the least dense county in terms of region, in terms of geographic area. in terms of where do Jewish households live. So this divides this up: Jewish households, Jewish adults, and Jewish children. You'll see that all kind of about the same. The largest share of Jewish households are in Essex County. The next largest is in East Morris. That's about a quarter of households. And then about an equal share of households are in Union and in Western Greater Metro West. So again, that's why Union is so much denser, because there are about the same number of households, Jewish households in Union as in all of this Greater Metro West area. Here are some numbers. This is all in the report, and I know that there's a lot of numbers to look at on the screen, but I just want to make sure that you know that this is available and that we've broken down the numbers by the number of households. This is the number I was referring to before. The number of people in Jewish households, that includes Jews and non-Jews. The number of Jewish adults, Jewish children, non-Jewish adults, and non-Jewish children. So this gives you a sense of where everybody lives. And then just the percentages of who lives where. So that's similar, just reading across. Let's see. One thing that you may note here is that although Union has 18% of households, it has 22% of children. So it's a little more, oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, I misread that. We'll just let that go. Okay, this is density. This is like the percent of all the households in that region, what percent are Jewish. You can see that in Union, 5% of households include a Jewish person. So that's actually the least dense of all of these regions, but 8% of people are Jewish. And so the numbers are not that different from region to region, but this may be interesting in thinking about, the understanding of the community a little bit better. In terms of age, one thing that does jump out is that the Union, along with Western Greater Metro West, Union in particular has more people under age 50, more Jewish adults under age 50 than any other region. So you can see that 20% of Union's Jewish adults are 18 to 34, and 25% are 35 to 49. So that's quite a bit younger than, a larger share than the other regions. The other regions, their big bump is in the 50 to 64. That's the largest share. In terms of household composition, a quarter of households have minor children, and you can see the composition of other households. Here again, there's some noteworthy differences. This is looking at the finances of the region. I didn't go into this up front, but 17% of households are financially struggling. Those are people who say either they're not, they don't have enough funds, or they're just getting along. And so together, that's 17% of all households. A little bit more in Union, a little bit more in Essex. East Morris has the smallest share of struggling households. The Jewish engagement that I talked about earlier. Here again, I'm going to point out differences between the different regions, just so you understand. East Morris has the much larger share of people who are minimally involved in Jewish life. Union has 17% of Union's Jews are in the immersed group. 22% are in the involved group, which is like the second highest Jewish engagement. So Jewish engagement overall is high in Union County. And here we can see denomination. This is where it really shows up. that 10% of Union's Jews are Orthodox, and it's much higher than any other region. But still, it's important to keep in mind that there are significant shares who are conservative, Reform, and no denomination in Union, as well as all the other counties. Union has the highest rate of synagogue membership. 46% of households are members of a synagogue, much higher than any other region. But when it comes to attending a high holiday service, there's actually Greater Metro West is less, but all the other regions are about the same. One of the things that we see consistently is that many people attend high holiday services who are not members of synagogues. There are all sorts of ways to do that. And we know that that's even more so in this COVID year. There were so many opportunities to attend services. So overall, about 32% of Jewish adults are members of a synagogue, but 42% attended a high holiday service. But in Union, we definitely see the rate of membership is much higher. In terms of membership, and this is other kind of ways of connecting with Jewish organizations, memberships in the JCC or a Y are highest in Essex and Union. I think that makes sense. Some Jews belong to other types of organizations. In terms of other kinds of ways of participating in Jewish life, this is attending a program or donating to Jewish organizations. There aren't really major differences by regions. They're all pretty similar. And here I'd like to end with some attitudes about being Jewish and how those differ across the community. So you can see, we asked a question, to what extent do you feel connected to any local Jewish community? This gold part is the people who say not at all connected. You can see that Essex and Union are almost exactly the same in terms of about a quarter of people feel very connected, a quarter somewhat, a quarter a little, and a quarter not at all. In East Morris and in Western Greater Metro West, the feelings of connection to the Jewish community, although in some cases are very strong, there's a real difference in those regions. And that's what I have for you this evening, and I welcome your questions.
Thanks, Janet. Really appreciate you walking through us all of those details. So much to learn from the rich data that you and your team have gathered. So we're going to take an opportunity now for questions. Like I said before, please put your questions in the chat and I'll moderate. You can start already putting them in there. While you're doing that, a word about what's going to be the types of questions that are going to be good for us tonight. So please do ask Janet anything about anything she presented, any of the slides that she shared, any of the data points she brought, anything about the methodology. She's certainly able to answer questions about that. And if you've already read the reports online, and by the way, I just put the link to our reports in the chat, and you have a question about something you read in the other reports, if you're able to even say, oh, in this particular report on this page, there's this data point, Janet can answer those questions as well. As great as Janet is at answering these questions, you can see there's so much rich data and it's a massive data set, and we don't expect Janet to have memorized it all. So questions that ask Janet to pull some data point out of the large data set probably aren't going to be as helpful. So we'll stick to stuff that Janet presented today or comes from the reports. So we have one question here that says, how old are the numbers? Linden, Union, and Hillside have surging numbers of Orthodox moving in. We just heard this story, Janet, when we were schmoozing on the beginning of the, so maybe you can respond to that.
Yeah. So yes, I heard all about Linden. So these numbers are accurate as of 2020. Yeah, we can't be that current. I think, I certainly understand the perception that a large number of Jewish households are, Jewish families are moving into some areas. Sometimes I'm not trying to, minimize that. I think sometimes it looks like lots of numbers because they're concentrated in a large area. I don't know that those numbers would be enough to change the story. However, perhaps they are an indicator of a trend, and we'll have to see, just like with everything else. Is this a short-term COVID impact? Is this a, sort of is this the beginning of a long-term trend? Some of the data that I did not present today, but it's in that same report about geography, has to do with mobility. And I just chose not to include that, but I think I'd encourage you to take a look at that. We did try to gather information about people who had moved to the area recently. And we even looked at, we didn't have enough people to say this, but if COVID was bringing people, but we have information about where people, how long have they moved, how long have they lived in the area, where do they move from? Of course, a lot have moved from New York. And what are some of the primary reasons that they've moved? And we also ask questions about what are your expectations for moving, just moving in the next, 5 to 10 years? And do you think that you would move somewhere else in Metro West, or would you move to another area? So there's a lot of information about trends. I don't have a crystal ball. And I often say that the best the best way to understand the trends and to think about refreshing the data is exactly this. What do you know about what's going on? Are the are schools opening and growing, or are they shrinking and slowing down? Same with synagogues, because the on the ground truth is the most up to date. And I think using that information to kind of in combination with this will be really valuable.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Janet. I'll just add that in addition to the information about folks who've moved to Greater Metro West in the last 5 years, about where they came from and why they came, there's also really interesting data there about how they engage in Jewish life. That aspect of the types of Jewish families that are moving into our community, I think was really interesting data as well.
Yes, in fact, I'm going to add one thing that I know did stand out, and I didn't include it today, is that this is a place where I noticed a trend that is a little unusual. I showed at the end a slide about how connected are you to the community, and I showed differences by region. It's in the report, differences by how long you've lived in the community. And in most communities, newcomers feel less connected. But in Greater Metro West, there are a significant number of newcomers who feel more connected than old timers. And I think that those are the Orthodox families moving in who, of course, immediately connect with the community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Happy to take more questions. Please do put them in the chat. While we're waiting for other questions, a question that's come up a lot of times, Janet, in the other meetings we've had, you did a lot of comparing between the different regions in Greater Metro West to each other and to the larger, the full cohort of the Jewish community in our full catchment area. We've been asked a few times, as you know, about how we compare to national trends and to other communities, and maybe you can say a few words about that.
Okay. I think it's a great question, and I'll say we are cautious about providing comparisons to other communities, except when I offer this, when I notice trends, because I see so many communities. Metro West, Greater Metro West is a really unique community. It's large, but it's, multiple towns and cities spread out over a relatively large geographic area as compared to, a Pittsburgh or Minneapolis or Cincinnati that has a city and then suburbs. And I think that that creates some different characteristics. So it's really hard we never draw direct comparisons from city to city. And so, so I think that I notice trends, but I don't like to focus on them, but information is all available if you wanted any specific information.
Thanks, Janet.
Mm-hmm.
Andrea put in that, from who is a Federation colleague who runs our PJ Library program, which, for those who don't know, is a way that many families of children engage in the Jewish community by getting books that she knows that there are new families moving with young children into Union County, and many of them are not Orthodox as well. So there's
yeah.
Back to your point about the data we have on the ground.
Right. And I also want to add to that, I think that we do think of Union County as being highly Orthodox, because there are a lot of Orthodox families concentrated there. But remember, I said 10% of Jewish adults in Union County are Orthodox. So even though that's a larger share than any other county, it's always important to remember that the majority of Jews in Union County are not Orthodox.
Right.
And so it's not surprising that it's the non-Orthodox families in Union County that are joining PJ Library.
Yeah. And as you said before, the story in all American Jewry is that growing number of folks who have no denomination. And in Union County, that was a third of the Jewish adults as well.
Mm-hmm.
I see Ruth raising her hand. Can we unmute Ruth so she could ask her question? It seems like she wants to ask her question. So I'm going to ask my friends who are doing the behind the scenes tech to see if we can unmute Ruth.
Yep,
Ruth, if you
Ruth
unmute
can
yourself.
Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead. Go for it.
First of all, shalom, Janet. I'm happy to see that you came from Union. I hope you spent time at the Union Y.
I went to school there when Schechter was upstairs in the
Y.
Y.
Started there, and that leads me to comment. You gave statistics as of 2020. By ignoring or by not including, not ignoring, the surging Orthodox population in Linden. I am a realtor. I check the closings every week. In Linden, there are at least about 8 every Sunday. The numbers, last I heard, it was over 250 families. The Y is being utilized for school. It's affecting our community organizations. Union with Bobov 45 is also growing. They already have plans for a synagogue. And that is growing slower, but is happening. In Hillside, the other side of what we call Westminster Avenue, Conan Street has Bobov 48 coming in, and not in as great numbers, but we're seeing it. The prediction is within the next 5 years, this will be a heavily Orthodox area. And I really think it is imperative that your numbers be reflective of that, because it's affecting community life.
I'm going to jump in here, Ruth. Thanks, Ruth. We're going to put you back on mute. Thanks for sharing that insight on the ground. The study, as Janet said, was a community-wide study that we completed in 2020. So that's the data we have right now. But surely the point is well taken, that it's a snapshot of a time, and that things surely could have changed since then. One of the questions that we at Federation need to ask ourselves is, now that we have this baseline of information, both what do we think it means to us right now, and also what's the type of future data collection we're going to want to do to keep track and see what the trends may be into the future. So, amongst the things we might need to look at is, have there been demographic changes based on the types of anecdotal data we're getting around, various communities, in our catchment area. So thanks for bringing that forward. I want to give an opportunity for any further questions, please feel free again to put them in the chat. So what I want to then turn to is to say that you know, this information that we've gathered about the Greater Metro West Jewish community, we hope is the beginning of a conversation throughout the Jewish community about the data, what data we have, right? Again, a snapshot from 2020, and also what we think it means and what we might do in response to it, to the data, to strengthen our community. You know, what are the types of things we learn from the data that would inspire us to, like I said at the top of our meeting, to take action to strengthen our Jewish community and help people and help care for people in our community. At the Jewish Federation, we are doing that work. Our lay leaders and professionals are working in partnership to bring together trends from across the community study reports and to identify priority areas for attention and exploration based on the data. We're going to be sharing out our work as it proceeds in the weeks and months ahead. And we hope that you and your communities in Union County, whatever institutions, organizations, communal groups that you are part of, will do the same. I put the link again in the chat earlier to all the reports that are on our website. We hope that you'll go through a process of reading them, thinking about them. And as you do so, if additional questions about the data arise, or if you want to dig into some aspect of the study, please feel free to be in touch with me directly at the Federation. We really want to be thought partners with the whole community as we leverage this important data that we have to all of our benefit. So with that, and with no more questions coming through in the chat, I want to thank Janet for her presentation. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to reiterate my invitation for continued thought partnership around this, and I want to wish everyone a very good evening. Thank you so much.